Hey, everybody, we are live back again with another How to Succeed podcast. You can check these out live on YouTube, Facebook, and LinkedIn. If you want to join in the conversation, you can always do that in the chat. Or if you're listening to this recorded later, that's okay too. Just remember to subscribe in your favorite podcast app, and you will get all the episodes as we get them edited up and scheduled out. This is How to Succeed at Driving Faster Decisions. My guest this week is Brian Jackson, Sandler coach from San Diego, and the following podcast, copyrighted by Sandler Systems LLC, protected by U.S. copyright laws. Sandler is the worldwide leader in sales, management, and customer service training with over 200 locations. I'm your host, Mike Montague, Director of Community Engagement, and it's time to talk about how to succeed at driving faster decisions. Brian, let's start there. I think the Sandler rule for me is only a decision maker can get other people to make decisions. How do we drive faster decisions when we're not the one making the decisions?
Well, first of all, thank you for having me back, Mike. It's good to see you. And that's a good Sandler rule. You'll hear my favorite Sandler rule on this. I'll save it for when you ask me later. But the main thing is that there is a difference between false self-serving deadlines and real deadlines that your prospects have personal, often even emotional investment in. And it's the paradox of selling that we as I think what constitutes a salesperson or a selling person is that your income is tied to your results. You could be a business owner, you could be a professional services provider, you could be technically a salesperson. What constitutes a salesperson is that if you don't get a yes or a decision, it can impact your income. That's what I think constitutes a salesperson. So there's a paradox there. The paradox is that on a conscious or subconscious level, we are driving towards the things that we want. It's hard to not do that, but we learn through life experiences, that the more that we let go, the more that things come to us. And that's very true when it comes to driving fast decisions. We let go of our own ego and what we're trying to get out for ourselves. And we just ask a simple question of, when do you need to get this done by? And tell me why that date's important to you.
Well, I love that because as an S personality myself, I hate it when people use arbitrary deadlines. I kicked a sales guy out of my house one time who was trying to sell us an HVAC unit because he was like, it was something at least $1,000 difference. It might have even been like $5,000 or $10,000 difference. And he said, if I have to come back on Monday, it's going to be $5,000 more. But if you decide right now, we'll see. I'm like, $5,000 for me to wait and talk to my wife about it? Like, no, get lost. I'll find somebody else that'll give me that price on Monday. And it seems like you said, so untrustworthy, and it just breaks rapport when you say something like the special price goes up on Monday. There's a special price. It's the end of our quarter, or I'm going to hit my bonus. And it's for you as the salesperson rather than for them. And when they want to see results. So I always love that reverse timeline that you're talking about of like, when would you like to see this implemented? And then how do we get there?
Yeah. We have to pay for the sins of all the salespeople past, right? So I sort of noticed in my previous roles in sales and leadership that we've almost conditioned our prospects to expect those discount incentives to come at the end of the quarter. And, we got to stop doing that to ourselves. Anyway, so agree with you 100%.
What's the ideal attitude here? We've already talked about a couple, but I think the interesting one for me here, and I don't want to lead the witness, but when I understood buying cycles and money concepts as the kind of head trash you were talking about, it really makes a huge difference. That oftentimes if we're somebody that likes to shop around for 6 months and get 3 quotes and do all kinds of background research, when somebody else says, I need to get 3 quotes, you go, yeah, you probably should. And you agree, and it takes a longer time. Now you're working with somebody that if you're the type of person who can make quicker decisions and move fast, when somebody wants to slow down, you question that, I think more appropriately and healthier. How do you think about the ideal attitude for a salesperson?
Yeah, well, I do think that you're onto something there, and I can tell that's what you were sort of ready to talk about when we heard this topic, right? Is buy cycles, decision makers make, they're better salespeople because they they have that energy transfer that, let's make a decision here. Let's have a clear, defined next step. And I think that's where, if that is an issue for you, if you are the sort of person that shops around, that's where journaling and really, creating a huge self-awareness of that, and then journaling to change your belief system to where, I expect people to be able to make fast decisions, can be really helpful. But, going back to what you said, something earlier that really struck me, was talking about the trust breakdown, right? So if you look at where we are in the sales process, when we get to the point that we're talking about the decision, you look at what's happened so far. There's a huge trust that's been built in the time that you have, built rapport initially in the call, and then you've uncovered pain. And in the Sandler methodology in our world, for those who are listening and familiar with it, that's where the most time is spent, is in uncovering the pain and getting really deep into what's the impact of the problem and how do people feel about it. So when you get to the point, it's sort of like dating. Just because you have a good first date and a good second date and a good third date, if you act like a complete jerk on the fourth or the fifth date, you're gone, you're out. On to the next. Well, when you get to this point that you're in the decision step and you start to do these false sort of things, like, we got to get this done by the end of the quarter, or this discount will go away, it's just a trust breaker. It ruins everything. It gets to the point that all that effort that you spent being seen as a trusted advisor, out the window. So, the thing that I want to really drive home here is that if you have really effectively, in your selling methodology, in your sales execution, if you have uncovered pain, and you're focused on that, focused on the prospect, do they have the problems I solve? Are they committed to fixing those problems? And you're focused on those problems, and you ask the question of, so in terms of a date, when do you want to see those problems gone? When do you want to, at a minimum, look at your to-do list and see this no longer on it, right? The beautiful thing about that is that it goes to my favorite Sandler rule. I'll tell you it now. You'll ask me later. Yeah. But people don't argue with their own data, right? People don't argue with their own data. And I have more in terms of how to, once you know that date, how to now use your knowledge and your experience to really drive them towards that date. I'll get into that whenever you want to.
Yeah, I think we're moving there into behavior now too, but I wanted to highlight what you said there. Really, is that pain is the thing that drives faster decisions. When they have a compelling emotional reason to do something different, people move fast. When they don't have very pain, or you've only uncovered surface level pain, they can be wishy-washy about it. But as we move into behavior, I did want to take one sidebar, and then maybe we can talk about that reverse timeline and technique. Is complicated decision-making processes. I think when I think of behavior, for me, the questions I would have for you are around multiple decision makers, or if we're not getting to the ultimate decision maker. Those always seem to be the top two that salespeople struggle with the most. And it really slows down the decision. If you spend a lot of time selling somebody who can't say yes, that can really slow things down. And then also, when you get competing priorities, so maybe one person has a whole lot of pain as an end user for a software, but the CEO doesn't have pain because he's not using it, and they're on a cheaper version. He's got pain of switching, and the CFO's got the pain of working the balance and keeping the profit margin where it is and stuff. And it can be a little complicated when we're trying to drive a quick decision here, especially with multiple decision makers. Do you have any advice there?
Well, the rule that goes with that, I think, is that if you feel it, say it gently. And when you feel concerns about, folks having to go to other people and, what they're going to have to hit and be up against in terms of the objections that they hear and face, I think the biggest thing in sales is to, just talk about that, get it out on the table. Don't assume that things are going to go the way that you hope they will. Hope's not a strategy, right? And you got to see what motivates other people. Sometimes one person's leveraging their motivation, and their pain all resides in their political capital, and whether or not they leverage it for a decision, they're not the ones that are impacted as much by, maybe the problem that you're solving. So, positioning yourself in terms of, how it might help their political capital might motivate them to prioritize something is worth, lobbying and advocating for. And I mean, that's to be honest with you, Mike, I feel completely separate. You could go for another whole podcast on navigating complex decision processes. There are a couple of
Yeah.
already really good podcasts on that topic that I would
We have done that
people
topic
go and
before.
listen to. I mean,
Yeah, I think the fair thing to wrap up there is also treating them individually. Like you said earlier, with the decision is asking. So asking what's in it for each one of those person, asking when they want to make the decision, when they individually want to get this done. Most people will say faster than not, and they'll tell you the reasons of what's in it for them. What else
I
comes to mind for you for
well,
behavior?
real quick though, I think another thing too is that when I'm working through decision makers and selling through other people, I think it's important for them to understand the the concept of reverse psychology. I think they have to understand, and sometimes I have to actually teach them like that when you push for something, you will get pushback. When you go to your boss and you tell your boss this is what you want to do, your boss will argue with you as to why they shouldn't do it. Just like if I had come to you and said you should do this, you would have argued with me. And so here's what's going to happen. I just came to you and I just guided you on a path of self-discovery to help you uncover your pain, your problems, the impact of those problems, whatever. And you, if you want to have the same result as what we had, where you're thinking this is a good idea, you now have to go do the same thing. Now, if you can't do that, if you don't think you can do that, then you need to bring me into the meeting to help you do that, right? But
That's
just know that
perfect.
when you go to your boss, and you try to tell them this is what you think they should do, you're going to fail. You're going to lose. It's just human nature. They're going to push back. So you got to go in and lead them. You got to make it your boss's idea. And again, if you feel like, I'm not prepping you well enough to where you can do that on your own, then you got to bring me in there to help you do it. Otherwise, the outcome is not going to be good.
I love that. Rehearsal is a powerful technique there when you're selling through other people. Anything else in the behavior bucket of doing the right thing at the right time?
The biggest thing is just clear, defined next steps. It's a habit.
Mm.
Every selling interaction has to have a clear, defined next step. And specifically in this case, it's knowing, when does the decision need to be made by, and why is that date important? Why is that date important? That's the big one. On that note, Mike, it's never too late to find pain. So you could be maybe it's not your best day. Maybe it's not your best sales call. Maybe you've had happy years. You've kind of sped your way through the pain step, and you're in the decision step, and you're kind of abandoning your principles. But gosh, you're not perfect. You're a human. Don't beat yourself up. And so when you ask this question of when do you need this done by, and why is this date important? Now you can get back into the pain step a little bit. You can say, first question, the pain funnel. Tell me more about that. Give me some specifics. Why is that date important? And now you're back in the pain funnel. You're uncovering pain.
I love that, and I also love that you set this up again with the clear future. So that clear future and that identifiable next step is so big for me. I think every call that I've messed up, it's when I've wimped out on that part, or I didn't get what happens if that doesn't happen. So if we say, oh yeah, we're going to get back together on Monday, and then we'll let you know what we decided or what the next step is, I need to ask that question. What happens if I don't hear from you on Monday? What would you like me to do? And having that contingency plan really helps move stuff forward. And as clear and specific as you can make that future really makes a huge difference. So things like, I'm going to hear from you on Monday. What time is that? Like Monday morning or Monday afternoon? Do you want to set an appointment on the calendar? We can just put 15 minutes on the calendar at 4 p.m. on Monday. Do you want to do that now? Great. I'll send you an invite. That's way different than, let me know what you think next week.
You know what, Mike? And I'll tell you something. The more that you
horrible weekend.
the more that you get burned, the more experienced you are in sales, the more specific you get. And one of my pet peeves when I'm prospecting clients, and they say, "Oh, we've got an experienced team. They don't need sales coaching." Look, you know what? There are plenty of experienced salespeople out there have been in sales for 20, 30 years, and they still will leave a meeting when someone says, we'll get back to you in 2 weeks, and they'll say, okay, yeah, sounds good. Yeah. And so, we're constantly striving for perfection. We rarely attain it, if ever. But this is one of those areas of clear, defined next step. What exactly is going to happen? We can get better and better and better at that.
Love that. Now we're going into the technique bucket. We've covered a bunch of these already. Negative reverse selling, the reverse timeline. We just talked about upfront contracts and clear futures. Let's circle back to the reverse timeline first, and maybe you can give us some talk tracks on how to do that. If I said something like, when do you want this by? And I said, well, we've got a big conference coming up in 90 days. How does that go from there?
Well, here's as far as technique goes, taking a step back, the direction I'd go with that. Like a technique that I would lean into is something in Sandler. I think it's kind of cool. It's called the dummy curve. You know, and what I'm really referencing is that when you identify a date, you lock down a date. This is where now you've got a lot of tools in your arsenal that you can use to drive urgency. And what I'm referring to specifically is that you're going to leverage all of your knowledge, all of your experience, to create some urgency by setting little mini benchmarks and of things that need to happen along the way. Here's specifically what I'm talking about. So um, you might know, based on your experience, that it might take a certain amount of time for building out the product or installing the product or going through procurement or legal review. When you're sitting down and you're talking to somebody about these things, you can ask questions, and again, you're using your knowledge, your experience to ask those questions, guide them on a path of self-discovery. But you're asking questions to where you're making them realize that there are going to be delays. And this is where you can also be very strategic, because some of these things you might know that the window could be 6 to 12 weeks, for example. Knowing that you want to drive something to get done, this is important. Knowing that you want to get something done by your publicly traded company's end of quarter deadline, right? So that you can drive that stock ticker value up, up, up. You can think strategically in terms of, do I go with this amount of time or this amount of time? There could be a range there. And you make it to where you can still drive them towards the deadlines that you're aiming for, but you're earning credibility by doing this in a way that that shows them that about all the different steps that are going to have to happen in this process. The approval of the T's and C's, the legal review, the build out, the installation of the product, the typical time that it often takes with clients like you to get those things done, and you're laying it all out. And one of the things that you mentioned earlier, Mike, you brought up trust, right? You brought up the fact that when traditional salespeople use these phony deadlines, that it's a trust breaker. Well, when you're doing it in this way, and you're showcasing your industry knowledge, your expertise, you're asking a lot of smart questions, making them realize the things that, gosh, you know what, we need to get started on this. If we're going to hit my deadline where this pain is solved, there's a lot that needs to get done. What's happening is you're building trust. And I believe that sort of execution, that sort of exercise is precisely what differentiates you from your competition, what builds enough trust to where they're willing to put their business with you over a competitor, even if your pricing is a little bit higher, because they just know that you'll be in good hands with you. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I love that so much, because it's easy to do with questions, and they're natural questions that professionals should ask, like the terms and conditions with the contract, right? You can just ask, hey, Brian, this is our first time working together. Would you say your legal department is quick on these kind of things? Can you turn around these kind of things, or do you have signing authority so that it's going to happen right away? Or is this one of the things where we need to build in 4 to 6 weeks for a legal review and a negotiation when we get to the end? And I found it just makes such a big difference in companies, and they'll tell you straight up, oh, no problem. Our CEO is going to sign off on this. It's going to go fast. Or they're going to tell you, oh, no, we're definitely going to need like 4 weeks or 8 weeks here in this process to get that done. And I think you know your industry and you know what the big things are, right? So I love that you said you're using your industry knowledge. That I've seen construction projects be interesting because they have a lot of sign off at the beginning, but then things move pretty fast. There's people
Right.
paying POs, they're moving money, they're doing a lot of stuff to keep that job moving, and everybody's working on the timeline. But other things like business services or accounting firms and professional services, it can be really slow all the way through the process. Everybody seems to keep resetting and they want more meetings and they want to take more time. And once you know that, you can talk about these common things up front and avoid some of those landmines.
And what's cool about the modern selling world of a lot of these conversations happening over Zoom is that you can throw up a whiteboard. You can do this obviously in person too, but you can throw up a whiteboard on Zoom, and you can put all these things in a timeline in front of them. Ask them like, hey, typically, Mike, when I'm working with folks in this vertical in your industry with titles like you, we see that often this stuff's got to go to legal. It's got to go to procurement. It's got to, that it's going to take time for you to get your staff together to train them and install this, that you might have other things that you're rolling out too, that we might be second or third in line. I'm guessing that's not the case here, and they're saying, oh, no, that's the case here. Of course, you already knew that was going to be the case there. Well, tell me more about that, right? What does that look like? Again, their data, you're writing it down on a whiteboard in front of them. You're putting the timeline in front of them in terms of all the steps that got to happen. And what's happening is you're filling more and more stuff that's going to need to happen before their pain is solved, which means that you're creating more and more urgency for them to take the next indicated step, which is to take this to whoever else needs to approve it and get this deal closed so that we can move forward with all these other steps that have to happen before the pain is solved. And notice, Mike, one last thing, that the ultimate peak of the mountain that we're aiming for is not a signed order. The peak of the mountain that we're aiming for is the pain being solved. That's what we're aiming for, which means that there's a lot that has to happen before that, not just getting the order.
I love that. We got a couple of good things there. Obviously, the pain's driving the speed and the motivation. You're letting their timeline and their decisions and their data drive what the steps are and their decision-making process and how many people and who's going to be involved in what. I also love that you brought up technology because I found there are some kind of pro level moves there in that and techniques of just saying like, hey, if we can't get everybody on the meeting, can we schedule it anyway and just hit record for everybody? Or can I do a quick, video summary of what we agreed upon for next steps and send that out? And we can actually drive these faster with technology that a lot of people still, I find, wait 6 weeks until we can get everybody on the calendar. We can get everybody together in person. And I think with the asynchronous communication you can do now over email, video, recordings of virtual meetings and getting everybody together, it should be a pretty quick process, faster than it ever has been before, right?
Yep. And you know what, going back to like using a whiteboard on Zoom and things like that, I mean, the reality is that most salespeople are out there winging it, right? And if you are one of the elite few that doesn't get emotionally attached to the sale at this point because you're excited that somebody said yes, they're ready to start making a decision or something like that. If you have the calmness, the neutralness, the third partiness to take your time to step back, put this decision timeline up on a whiteboard in front of them, you're doing something that probably none of the other salespeople that they're working with are doing. And you're showing them that, this is a company that we can put our business with. We can trust these people.
I love it. Any other final thoughts here as we wrap up? How to succeed at driving faster decisions. Brian Jackson, Sandler coach in San Diego.
No, I think that just the main thing is no mind reading, no mutual mystification, getting it all out there, using your knowledge, your experience per the dummy curve, which we didn't really go into. But the dummy curve is that, sometimes we can get in our own way by just kind of blurting out the stuff that we know, and we're better off by instead using that stuff to ask smart questions, because at the end of the day, my favorite Sandler rule, I'll tell you it again, it's that people don't argue with their own data.
I love it. Again, Brian, thanks for being on the show. I've asked you our cheesy job interview questions plenty of times, so they can go back and search for other podcasts here that we've done with Brian Jackson and the How to Succeed feed. Also, there's a lot of other things on decision. We've mentioned that. So multiple decision makers, complicated decision-making processes, and all that kind of good stuff there. We did get one last question. So we'll do this last question and then we'll wrap up. I was getting ready to hit that. Somebody live on LinkedIn here says, the person that signs is typically not educated on the technical service that we sell. So the champion will call them and communicate with the signee. Any advice on this? We did hit this a little bit earlier on how do we use that champion to sell and leverage in our decision making.
So the person that signs is typically not educated on the very technical service we sell. So the champion, we'll call them, that we communicate, is not the same.
So we got like a technical buyer there that's working with probably like a financial person or a CEO executive person that is actually signing the deal. Any final thoughts on that one?
I guess if I'm understanding this question right, the general high level answer I would say is that, we've got to be the expediters of communication, right? It's our job as salespeople to make sure that the communication is flowing clearly and thoroughly. So, where there could be breakdowns in someone on the technical end not being able to explain really the merits to the financial end, we've got to sometimes come in and I guess help with that, right? I mean, but one thing's for certain.
I think you did that great earlier. I would encourage you to flip back about 20 minutes or so. Brian did a great role play of it's just a rehearsal with them of saying, hey, sometimes when you take this to the person who signs it, they're going to ask you weird questions. They're not going to understand what all these numbers and parts are and technical data. How are you going to handle that? And when they ask you, would you like me to be there so that I can answer those questions for you? Or sometimes this is a personal skill set of mine. I love translating. Be like, I translate nerd speak into CFO, or I translate nerd speak into executive speak. That's my job as a salesperson. Do you want me to handle that for you?
Well, hey, let's go. So how do you translate into nerd speak into financial CFO speak? Pain funnel, right? So when you get into the pain funnel and you have that pain funnel conversation with your financial person and your technical person on the phone, technical person can answer, tell me more about that, the details, the time it's been a problem, the actions they've taken previously. But, when we get into the next question of what's been the impact on this in terms of financial impact, that's when the CFO can chime in and understand that, X number of this is going to really hit the bottom line in that kind of way. And that's when, it'd be great to have that pain funnel question with both of those people on the phone so that ultimately when you're driving a lot of these decisions in the boardroom, that's in the C-suites, that's going to be their pain. Their pain is going to be around the financials.
And I love that you brought that up too, because the last thing for me is aligning buying and selling teams. Have your CFO talk to their CFO, or have your leader talk to their leader. And you can, your technical person talk to their technical person, if that's what it is. And aligning the buying teams while you're there to facilitate those relationships and ask good questions can help a lot too. So there is another podcast on aligning buying teams and stuff as well, or you can search the Sandler.com blog for that. So until next time, whatever you are, be a good one. That's what I always say. The How to Succeed podcast is brought to you by Sandler, the worldwide leader in sales management and customer service training with over 200 locations. For more information, go to Sandler.com, subscribe to this podcast, share it with a salesperson or sales leader that you think needs to see it, and we'll talk to you next time. Have a great week, everybody.